Welcome everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to the Art History with the Artists and the Librarian. I'm Sarah Burris. I'm the Community Relations and Marketing Coordinator for the Bay County Public Library. And today's program is just to introduce you to the renowned architect, Frank Lloyd Wright. And he has so much work that it's really hard to compress into a short presentation. So hopefully this will just kind of give you a little taste of what he does, and then you can do more research later. I did want to highlight that in the chat box, I have placed the links for the upcoming programs. So our next art history class is going to be focused on Vincent van Gogh, which I'm excited about because a lot of his work is in the public domain to where I can download really high resolution images, and it'll be bright and colorful. So I'm very excited to share his work and his life, and that'll be May 11th at 2 p.m. Central Time. Then the next programs I wanted to highlight, every Tuesday for the rest of the month, I have something happening. So next week, Tuesday the 20th is an Audubon program. So you can learn about Florida Panhandle rooftop nesters, and the main bird that is going to feature is the least terns. So I hope you can attend that. It's going to be presented by an Audubon biologist who focuses on rooftop nesters, so Rebecca Snyder, and the link is available there. And then the following program, the following week on Tuesday on the 27th, is a Zoom book club. And the way that we're going to do that is it's going to be more meeting format rather than the webinar format. So everyone can see each other. It'll be much more casual. And the author, Melinda J., she's a professor for creative writing at FSU and Panama City. And she just released Annie Laura's Gift. It's fantastic. It's a historical fiction based on her great-great-grandmother. So who was a German immigrant who relocated first in Georgia, then to Florida, but kind of close to Chipley and the Falling Waters area. And so you can kind of really feel what it would have been like to be in Florida at that time. So I thought it was a great book. Definitely stayed up late trying to finish reading it. And the link for that is also in the chat. I think that's the introduction. So let's get started to explore Frank Lloyd Wright. The good building is not one that hurts the landscape, but one which makes the landscape more beautiful than it was before the building was built. And I selected this quote because I thought it was perfect for Frank Lloyd Wright's philosophy in architecture. It really gets at the heart of his architectural design. And I'm not going to go too far into his personal life. Like, I'm not going to go into his upbringing. There's further resources for that if you are interested, and in like his youth, and more details on all of his romances and his children. And the Ken Burns DVD is in the library collection, which is, it kind of covers the gamut. So it's got both his personal life as well as the architectural side of everything. And so I would highly recommend that if you're wanting to learn more. But we're going to be looking at the designs and their evolution or inspirations rather than the personal life, unless the house is wrapped into the personal life, which is the case in one of them or two. So we're going to begin kind of with inspirations. So Frank Lloyd Wright was born in 1867. So the first thing to establish is what was happening in architecture at that time. So the Great Chicago Fire of 1871 destroyed 17,450 buildings. So at this time, architects are just flooding to the city. So they want to rebuild the city. And Wright had attended the University of Wisconsin to study architecture. However, he didn't finish his studies. He was too excited to begin. So he went straight to Chicago at the age of 20 in 1887. He began to work for the Adler and Sullivan architectural firm in 1888. And Wright greatly respected Louis Sullivan, seeing him as one of the first uniquely American architects. So think of all the other architectural that's happening at this time. So it's very influenced by European styles. You've got neoclassical, Tudor, Victorian, etc., and so forth. And high rises are just on the cusp, so which is Coincidentally, the first high-rises and skyscrapers are in Chicago around 1885, because this is the time where everything's getting rebuilt, which I thought was interesting. And Louis Sullivan did help on some of the high-rises. So this building on the right is the James Charnley House, and it was built in 1892 by Sullivan, and Wright did help design this piece as well. The designs are very modern. Sullivan was part of the founding group of Prairie School architects, which Wright made his own. And so when you think of Prairie School design, you immediately think of Frank Lloyd Wright. However, he wasn't quite the person who initiated that design. He just made it his own. There's the flat roofs and horizontal lines, and they're meant to mimic the vast American prairie landscape. Now, Frank Lloyd Wright would always say that Louis Sullivan was one of his greatest inspirations on his personal design work. However, Frank Lloyd Wright also was taking design jobs on the side from wealthy clients, which Sullivan and Adler weren't too keen on. So their friendship and partnership kind of was severed, and he was let go in 1893. Then he went on to do his own thing. And this is another inspiration. Frank Lloyd Wright's admiration for Japanese architecture began with the Japanese Pavilion that was built for the 1893 Chicago World's Columbian Exposition. The Hoeden, or Phoenix Palace, which was kind of a symbolic gesture to Chicago's rebuilding after the fire in 1871. And it was designed by Masamichi Kuru, right? And Kuru is one that also was influenced by American designs, or looking outside of just Japanese design too. So there was an interesting merge there. But Wright and Sullivan were both able to watch the construction of this pavilion as it was being constructed and built, and it stayed in Chicago for a while longer. So they were influenced by the architectural design differences in this building. And note the kind of the clean lines as well. But here is an image that is not, it looks like it's not as high res, so it's a little softer, but this is an interior space. And notice just how open that interior space is. There's no like columns for support. It's very wide. And that's something that is directly pulled into Prairie House style design. Frank Lloyd Wright himself, he traveled to Japan starting in 1905, and he collected Japanese woodblock prints. So this is all heavily influencing into his personal design as well. He appreciated the clean lines, the simplicity, and how much Japanese design was inspired by nature. So it's both beautiful and functional. Okay, and last inspiration. So the Prairie School style is also influenced in part with the design philosophies and ideals of the British arts and crafts movement. So it's an aesthetic and lifestyle that's pushing back, because at this time you've got the Industrial Revolution, you've got the rise of the machines, and so this is a pushback against that. So it wants to focus on strong elements of design and hand craftsmanship. Focus on nature and kind of becoming one with nature once again. And so it's this started around the mid 1800s, and William Morris is the lead in the arts and crafts movement in Britain. This is an example of his home, which is located in England, close to London. And he's kind of got a little bit more of a medieval aesthetic that he appreciates. But what can be seen in Wright's work and the Prairie style is the design and detail of everything. Both the house is designed, and then the interior space is also heavily designed. And this includes stained glass, which you're going to see as well with Frank Lloyd Wright. Now, Morris is most known for his textile and wallpaper designs. So just in case you hadn't seen his wallpapers, I wanted to put them up because his work is gorgeous. And then random tangent that I just learned this past week was that a lot of his early wallpapers were toxic, which was kind of a contradiction to the arts and crafts movement, because he had anything with like that green pigment in the Victorian era was often very heavily had a lot of arsenic in it. And he had ties with an arsenic mine. So he was using arsenic in a lot of the wallpapers as well. It wasn't until the mid 1870s that he started doing arsenic-free wallpaper because people were dying or getting very sick. Anyways, that's a tangent. And the arts and crafts movement then moved to America because there's a lot of anxieties about the industrialization happening in America as well. And the artist's hand is then being seen. And one of the lead locations in America for the arts and crafts movement is Chicago. So Wright was like in Chicago at the perfect time and place to absorb all of these different various influences. Oak Park is the first personal home of Frank Lloyd Wright that he designed and became his architectural design studio as well. And this is where his first wife, Catherine, nicknamed Kitty, lived with him and their 6 children. And it's actually a shingle style home, not a prairie house. It's a little bit more European influence. However, he was starting to experiment and starting to open up that interior space. He didn't dive into the Prairie Home style right away. His first decade was working on developing his first personal style, was still pulling from the European influences like this one, which was a Tudor revival style home. He nicknamed this one the Hans Christian Andersen House. However, some of the styles are borrowed from the arts and crafts movement as well. And the house names, so like this one's called the Moore House. The house names generally take that last name of the client. So in this case, Nathan G. Moore was the client for the home, so it's going to be called the Moore House. It's still beautiful. And this is the quintessential prairie home that Wright designed, the Roby House, located in Hyde Park neighborhood in Chicago, 1909 to 1910. So notice those flat roofs, those lines mimicking the prairie landscape. And the second image is taken kind of shortly after it was built, so you can really see how it's interacting with that landscape. And Frank Lloyd Wright wanted the designs to be truly American in style. The homes, the Prairie Home designs got a lot of attention. And in his first decade of working, he did like 100 different Prairie Homes for wealthy clients. And then just imagine over time how many homes he's designed and buildings for businesses and other things. His Prairie style homes are made out of materials that reflect nature, including wood, clay, and stone. And some of these materials are seen in the interior space as well. So this one has a lot of that wood showing through. And note the openness in the interior, very similar to the Japanese architecture seen in his travels. And if an additional support column was not needed, he would not add one in. And he wanted to merge beauty and function of architecture, and he appreciated those flat, clean lines found in the Japanese woodblock prints. Now remember looking at William Morris's art and crafts designs. So Frank Lloyd Wright's designed not only the homes, but the furniture and the interior spaces as well. The stained glass windows is geometric, abstracted design, but it still reflects nature. So these do kind of almost look like a wheat-like botanical structure, very linear yet organic, which is an interesting contradiction. And the Roby House has some of Wright's best work with the leaded stained glass windows. So a ton of different windows throughout the home. And the tables and chairs were designed to fit the house. And he was very particular where he even wanted things to be located. So there's a story where a Prairie Home was built. He visited the client after, and the client had moved some furniture around. He came to the home and then moved it back to where he wanted the furniture to be, how he envisioned that space, which I think is kind of funny. So now for a little bit of that personal life, since it's embedded to the history of the home. Frank Lloyd Wright was not all that interested in family life, despite his large family. And one of his Prairie Home clients was Edwin H. Cheney and his wife, Martha Barthwick Cheney. I can never say her maiden name, Barthwick, known as Mama, in 1903. And after that, Mama and Frank began an affair. She had 2 children, but she was like intellectual, and Frank really liked that. So he was asking for a divorce in 1908. Kitty was not ready yet. So Mama and Frank just left for Europe for a year, and her husband granted her the divorce. But at the time, it's a huge scandal, and it affected his work. And that's kind of why I wanted to include that part, because no one wanted to hire him. He was seen as scandalous, and that was making the newspapers. The press was really digging into that fact. But Frank did what he wanted. He lived big, and he often even spent beyond his means as well. Not very good at budgeting. Even budgeting a project, he was horrible at. He would always under budget and then require more budget later. In 1911, Taliesin was built, and I think this is just such a beautiful home, how it's integrated into the landscape. And it's Welsh for shining brow on top of a hill, and it's built in Spring, Wisconsin. And this is the home that they lived in with his new studio, and it's a stunning prairie house that is kind of woven in, and this is what you would coin as Frank Lloyd Wright's organic architectural design, since the house itself becomes embedded into that landscape. However, this house is also wrapped in personal tragedy. So Mama, Wright's mistress, lived in the home with him, and he was off for travel in Chicago. But on August 15th, 1914, Mama and her 2 children, as well as Wright's draftsmen and workers, were sitting down to have some lunch. They had just been served their lunch by Julian Carton. Gertrude and Julian worked for Wright, and they were husband and wife. And Julian had told his wife to kind of leave early, and she was the cook, and he served the lunch that day. And while everyone was eating, then you just start smelling gasoline, because he is pouring gasoline under all the doorways. He then lights the house on fire. The doors were locked. 3 of them, the carpenter, landscape designer, and draftsman, were able to escape out of a window. However, Julian was blocking another exit with an axe, hence the image on the bottom there. And so he killed them if they tried to escape that way. As there was only 2 survivors total, 7 had died, and then Julian had swallowed acid after the fire. So he was in prison, but he couldn't eat, so he didn't live much longer, and he never revealed why he did what he did. His wife mentioned that he was a little paranoid going up to the mass murder, but it's kind of like an unresolved thing, and it was heartbreaking. He was first in the press for the affair, and then now he's in the press for the fire. And they're kind of making it seem like they may have deserved it because of what was, anyways, it's just to kind of get a point of view of what was happening at that time period. And the house itself even had like a nickname. So this one's like the Bungalow of Love, or Love Cottage was another one. But Wright was heartbroken, and he immediately went back to rebuild the home, which had another fire in 1925 because of bad wiring. So this house has been reconstructed 3 different times, but it became his main studio. This is the last little big section about personal stuff, and I'll move on. So Kitty did divorce him in 1922. Then he married Miriam, which was tumultuous. And then in 1928, he married his final wife, Okavana, who really helped make Wright a globally recognized name. She encouraged him to turn the Taliesin into an active architectural apprenticeship program, and with the Taliesin Fellowship starting in 1932. And she also convinced him to write his autobiography. So Taliesin became a community. The apprentices farmed the land, they built buildings, they drafted new designs. It was a very active, vibrant place. And that was through the rest of his life. And then in the winters, they would go travel to the Taliesin West in a caravan to Scottsdale, Arizona. First, they would build the building, and then that included all of these drafting studios. A lot of apprentices were able to fit in the space. And they would stay there in the winter. And once again, the architecture reflects the landscape, but because the landscape's so different, the architecture has a different spin as well. So now we're going to backtrack back to more around the shortly after the murders. So Wright greatly admired Japan, saying that the country was the most romantic, artistic, and nature-inspired country on earth. And in 1916, he stayed in Japan to work on designing the Imperial Hotel built from 1917 to 1923 in Tokyo. And it had been commissioned to kind of bridge the Japanese and American aesthetics. And Wright designed everything, including stationery and dinner plates and chairs and all the details. The building itself is Maya Revival style, which I'm not entirely sure how that merges Japanese and American style, but he's innovative. And here's a picture of the interior space. So on the far left is the lobby area, and this is one of the peacock chairs that he designed. And the far right is one of the architectural sketches, and he did 700 architectural sketches for this building, which is a lot of drawings. And I think some of them would have been including furniture designs as well. However, in 1923, there was an earthquake. So the earthquake was a 7.9 earthquake, coined the 1923 Great Tokyo Earthquake. And afterwards, so you can see that it survived. It's on the one that I've circled on the left. And he received a telegram saying that the hotel stands undamaged as a monument of your genius. Congratulations. And then Wright promptly shared that telegram with the press so that his buildings can withstand this 7.9 earthquake. The second image is just to kind of show a little bit more of the destruction that this earthquake did cause. It's the same earthquake. Okay, and I wanted to show one more Prairie House, the Allen House in Kansas, built around when Wright was also working on the Imperial Hotel. It's designed for the former Kansas governor, Henry Justin Allen, and his wife, Elsie. And first of all, it's just a beautiful home. And I was also able to find some more of those architectural drawings for the furniture, so I wanted to share those as well. His furniture designs look like blueprints, which I think is very interesting. I don't normally think of furniture designers designing it to look like this. So very, very straight lines. So there's all the little details. And he even designed what he wanted to go on top of the furniture. So a Tapa Ray is a small table with cabinet or drawers, and he drew everything. So he drew kind of like this bonsai tree, and then the linen that's going over on top of it. So I just want you to think for a moment, if you could live in a Wright home where he just designed all the details, like your personal style wouldn't be incorporated at all. I guess you just have to know that if you had a Wright home, you have to go with everything. Study nature, love nature, stay close to nature. It will never fail you. Wright has done a lot of the Prairie Houses, but he really wanted to create works that are even more impressive. So he's constantly evolving. So in the 1920s, he's still receiving bad press from the affair. And then there was the Great Depression. He's seen as a has-been. But then he had the Taliesin Fellowship in 1932, sparking interest in his designs once again, because architectural students were like, oh, Frank Lloyd Wright, I totally want to work with him. And so they were kind of flocking to that apprentice program. And this allows Wright to kind of get back in the forefront of architectural design once again, especially after having built this home. So one of Wright's architectural apprentices was Edgar Kaufman Jr. And his father, Edgar Kaufman, became very interested in Frank Lloyd Wright's design. And so he commissioned a home to be built on their country estate in Pennsylvania. Wright visited the location in 1934 and had an engineering company come and write out all the topography. So even like tree here, boulder here, so that he could fully picture what he was working with. And one of the Kaufman's favorite locations on the land to picnic was near that waterfall, basically right where the house is. So I want you to live with the waterfall, not just look at it, but for it to become an integral part of your lives. Now, Kaufman wasn't quite as thrilled with the plan to build it on the waterfall rather than being able to look at the waterfall, but it's a stunning example of Wright's organic architectural design. So it's organic, hence that it's fully incorporating that landscape environment into the house design. The home coexists with that space in harmony. And you can almost hear the sound, just looking at the picture, what the sound of the falls would have looked like if you were in that home. And here are some additional views of the location. Notice the materials used largely of wood and stone, strong linear composition, everything's intricated. The rock is from local stone quarry, and the location was entrusted after they were kind of done with the home, living there as a family. It was then entrusted to the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy to preserve the area. And it, like a lot of Wright's homes, are now part of the National Historic Landmarks, and they provide tours, and they have all this preservation that's been done on them so that they can kind of withstand the test of time. So this is just one of the ones that you can plan to visit. And Frank Lloyd Wright may be most known for his homes, but he designed businesses as well. And this one's so pretty. The Johnson Wax headquarters in Racine, Wisconsin also mimics nature, creating these extreme complex lily pad structures made out of concrete. So just imagine the weight, it's like very top heavy, and then it comes down. So that's the opposite of what normally you would do with a concrete structure. It was kind of built around the same time as Falling Waters, 1936 to 1939. And it was way more expensive than he predicted. And so the company had to pay that out of his budget. Once again, not good with budgets. The roof leaked, which took a little problem solving. But Herbert Johnson was happy with the final product, so much so that he also had a research tower designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. Frank Lloyd Wright really wanted the space to be as inspiring a place to work in as any cathedral ever was to worship in. So can you imagine working in this structure? Like, would your productivity levels be higher? Or would you be more relaxed while you're working? I don't know. He even designed the office furniture as well. So everything, once again, all the little details. The building's still used by S.C. Johnson and Sons, and the link at the bottom, you can kind of do an interactive tour and see more about the history of the construction, which is interesting. I'd like to have free architecture. I'd like to have architecture that belongs where you see it standing and was a grace to the landscape instead of a disgrace. So Frank Lloyd Wright is working this entire time. He still has his Taliesin fellowship with apprentices. He still has jobs coming in. He still has several design trends over the years that I haven't even mentioned because it's just too much to cover. I probably did a poor job of trying to condense everything. He even has these textile block concrete houses, and then more affordable houses that are kind of ranch style, but I think they were largely concrete as well. A large body of work. In this picture, he is 89 and he lives to be 91. And he works this entire time. This is the last building completed. It's a 15-year project and the only one I've personally seen in person. The Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum in New York, New York. The land was acquired from the museum in 1944. Construction began in 1956 for Wright's design. There was still some like battles on museum wants this, Wright wants this, and Wright was really hard to work with. And I think they probably got the most, I don't know, tug and pull of what they wanted as well. He wanted to have the whole building be stone, and they knocked it to be concrete just so that it could help with that budget constraint. And it opened to the public in 1959. However, Wright had passed away 6 months prior to the opening of to the public. It's very unlike most museum designs. And one of the main things is it's this thing that's been in all of his structures, very open interior space. So even the museum is super open in the interior. There's a large skylight on top. And so the image on the right, you can see the floors, and then all of that's open in the middle. And so you can see everything going up, and then there will be a skylight on top, which feels very open. And so when you're walking in the space, you're just kind of a slight incline. It does really well for exhibits, even installation art. It does a really well job. And I feel like because you don't get lost as easily, like, have I been in that room yet? I'm not sure. Is a little less like you're going to get museum fatigue, which is, like, I'm just tired, I'm done. So you just kind of follow the space and it tells you where to go. I think is a very cool design for a museum. A little biased. And it's so different from like New York, he was not a fan of. However, he's still kind of incorporating this building into its concrete landscape in many ways. And I think it's an interesting juxtaposition with all these very tall skyscrapers and then the Guggenheim. The building looks fantastic. Most of the architecture highlighted in this talk are available to visit, so you can plan future travels when you begin traveling to visit Frank Lloyd Wright's designs. He's one of the few architects everyone knows his name. And this is really just a very broad overview of his life and work. So for more research, check out from the Bay County Public Library or the Northwest Regional Library System. Here are a few titles that we have for further research. Frank Lloyd Wright biography by Meryl Seacrest is for if you really wanted to learn more about like his upbringing and his family and the whole relationship side of things. Falling Water Rising, Frank Lloyd Wright, E.J. Kaufman, and America's Most Extraordinary House by Franklin Toker is a beautiful book to hold. It's very specific to Falling Waters and Kaufman. You learn a lot about his biography and life, and it's very text heavy. So if you're looking for more pictures, it has some, but it's more text-based. And then Prairie Style by Dixie Laker and Christian Korab is picture heavy and a lot less text, just a little bit at the bottoms. But if you're just wanting to see pictures of what the interior spaces look like, that's the book for you. The Ken Burns PBS documentary on Frank Lloyd Wright is fantastic. It's about 3 hours long with a part 1 and part 2, and you'll see a lot of actual footage, interviews with his family. It's good for if you want to do a deep dive on Frank Lloyd Wright. And 2 fiction titles. The Women by T.C. Boyle focuses on the 4 women in Wright's life, and Loving Frank by Nancy Horan focuses on Mama Borthwick Cheney and her love affair with Frank Lloyd Wright. And the interesting side note with the author, she's a longtime resident of Oak Park, Illinois, which is where Frank's first home was and where Mama and her first husband lived. So it's just a few houses down from her home is where their house was. So that one is based heavily on Mama's letters that were made. Thank you so much for listening to me ramble. Would anybody like to chat? I know I missed a lot. I do want to ask, has anyone been to a Frank Lloyd Wright home or building, and what was the experience like? I've heard that the hallways were really narrow.
I'll tell you real quick.
Oh,
This
go
is
for it.
I've visited the one in Phoenix,
Ooh.
and just, I mean, it's been perfect, but I just remember how beautiful it was and how it just really blends in with the, with with the landscape. So that's what I really love about his architecture.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to think of architecture as, I mean, you're thinking sculpturally almost. You're turning it into almost like that merge between house and landscape.
Yes.
So, Sarah,
Uh-huh.
you don't know of a location anywhere near where you could go and visit one of those homes, do you?
There's one in Florida, I believe. I can't remember what it's called. I think it's a school.
Yes, it's the school in Lakeland.
Okay, have you been there?
I have not been there. It's and I've lived in Florida all my life. But yes, I'm pretty sure it's Lakeland, and I can't think of the name of it.
Florida Southern College. And I think that one has more concrete structure. Okay, Arthur says that he's been to several and the homes feel spacious from the inside while having a small footprint. He did an amazing job of melding the outdoors and the indoors. He really appreciated nature. I think he grew up on a farm, and he wanted all of the element of nature to be merged into his work as well. Kind of not tearing it down, but kind of keeping what you like most about the landscape, which contradicts a lot of other architects. Level everything out.
Now I just Googled it in Florida, and I didn't know this either, but they says there's one in Tallahassee. It was designed by him.
Okay.
It's called the Spring House. It says it's the only Frank Lloyd Wright designed private residence built in Florida. And you either have to have a reservation. Now, I don't know how accurate that is because of COVID, but I think we all need to make a road trip to Tallahassee. That's an easy one.
Oh, that would be fun.
Look into that one.
They do offer safe public tours, but they closed their doors in 2020, so they must just be doing the reservation only. So maybe that is how they can keep it safe.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a fun looking house. It looks cool. Almost looks like a tree house, even though it's not lifted. So I'm really excited about Van Gogh, and that'll be Tuesday next month, the second Tuesday of the month on the 11th. The link is in the chat box. But is there anything of like any piece of Van Gogh's that you definitely want me to cover?
If everybody has time, the movie that I don't know what's his name, Kirk Douglas starred in, and Van Gogh. It's a good movie. It's a real good movie.
Let me look into that. Maybe it can be a resource. That sounds cool. Yeah, there's a few resources that are with Van Gogh. He has a lot. There's a graphic novel I really like called Vincent, and so I'll be sharing that one as well. There's also a book called Frank Lloyd Wright's Field Guide by Thomas A. Hines, which lists all the buildings still standing, and it lets you know if it's a private building or if you can see it from the road, or if you can whether you're trespassing or not, or if you can tour. Very good tip. Well, thank you again for joining me, and I'll see you next time.